don't see through the smoke, cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't, is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
I found interesting, the reason why I brought HR 22 up was because it deals with the budget. In there, it had to have the language about adhering to the existing rules of the House. And in those rules are the Pay-As-You-Go Act. You remember PAYGO? This is part of what it's doing. So just a little rewind. Remember when AOC was talking about they won a repeal of PAYGO, that was no longer going to be part of the House rules. Well, I went and looked to see if that had been introduced, and I don't see that. It's not there. So PAYGO is not a rule like the filibuster. PAYGO is actually law. So in order to repeal PAYGO, somebody has to issue the legislation. It has to go through the process. It's not there yet. So somebody ask one of the squad members when this is coming, because what they said, and this is where I want to push back and also offer my own personal apology, is they kept saying that PAYGO, we won PAYGO because PAYGO is an obstacle to progressive policy. And I, like maybe many of you, went, oh, okay. And last night I was kicking myself. I was like, why haven't you looked up PAYGO? Why haven't you looked? Is what they were saying true? So last night, while I was doing research for this HR 22, I looked it up, and I have to apologize. It took me years to do this. And what I found, I want to share with you, because PAYGO is absolute and utter bullshit. And it does not impede progressive policy in any way, shape, or form. It does not impede Medicare for all in any way, shape, or form. And what they are saying about PAYGO is an absolute outright lie. What PAYGO actually does, we're going to get into, but it is the dual justice system, basically on a legislative level. Some things are subject to PAYGO, other things are not. The things that you want, PAYGO. The things that the pork barrel projects that Congress wants, not. So these are things that you need to know, so that when somebody, and I don't care who it is, if it's your favorite politician says, well, how are we going to pay for it? You need to know the answer, right? And if somebody says, well, we can't do it because of PAYGO, you need to know that that's wrong. And we're going to go through a little bit of that today. So, Andy, how do we pay for this shit?
Just like you pay for everything else.
Right.
Well, it's every time, excuse me, every time Congress decides to spend on something,
Mm-hmm.
they tell the Federal Reserve, okay, mark up the accounts of this person, of this company, this corporation, this whatever, and it's all just spent into existence. The federal government does or does not have any money. They don't have money. They create money every single time they spend. So the whole idea of the PAYGO rule is complete and utter nonsense, right? It's when Congress decides to spend on something, they do. That money is spent into the economy, right? It goes into the hands of people, changes hands, and stays circulating in the economy until it eventually is used to pay taxes back to the federal government, and then its finite life ends at that point. And that's the way that Congress pays for everything. Ta-da!
Ta-da! see, that's super easy. So yeah, we're going to talk about PAYGO in relation to the explanation that Andy just gave. These are really important things that you need to understand, especially in your civic duty and going out and being an advocate for the policies that you care about. So, okay, so this is where PAYGO gets kind of wonky with accounting, and it took me a minute to go through it and go, what do they really mean here? So PAYGO does not affect everything that we want to pay for. PAYGO only affects statutory items. So there is the discretionary spending in annual appropriations like the military budget. PAYGO was not a requirement of satisfying the military budget. So just real quick, what PAYGO is, you cannot, with these specific items, if you want to buy something in certain situations, you cannot increase the deficit, which is, okay, that's an arbitrary measure. You can't increase the deficit without offsetting. You either have to raise taxes or cut something else, right? And so the way that it was explained initially is this was going to be across the board and we were going to be responsible for our deficit. So for those who haven't read Warren Mosler's book or Stephanie Kelton's The Deficit Myth, go read those and you'll understand exactly what the deficit measures. And Andy, would I be correct in saying the deficit is a measure of our investment in certain resources and industries, not necessarily debt?
Yeah, you have to think of it in terms of the actual deficit is the yearly difference between what Congress has spent in terms of money into the economy, subtract the amount that has been removed by taxation, right? So it's just a ledger, right? It's just a number that is the difference. So what's the subtract the amount of taxes removed from the amount spent in, and that's your deficit. The national debt is a running total of those yearly deficits, right? And the other thing that you have to remember is that when you talk about the federal deficit, that's also, you can talk about, that's a public surplus, right? On if you look on the balance sheet, there's two sides to every balance sheet, right? What if you think about in terms of a deficit for the government is a surplus to us, right? That's money spent in, so that's money to us, and that's how the government finances the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm old enough to remember when President Clinton ended up lowering the deficit to the point where we had a surplus, and that completely screwed small businesses because the federal government was no longer investing in sectors. So that meant small businesses had to do more with their limited capital. It
Right.
was not a good time if you were a small business owner.
And that whole idea, when you think about it, that government finances the economy, right? The United States government is the sole issuer of the currency, right? It provides the currency to keep the economy going, right? If the government wants to have a surplus instead of a deficit, that means they're going to tax more money out of the economy than they put in. Well, you're starving the economy of money, right? The only other place that people can get money to either pay their taxes or eat or pay their rent or whatever is from the private sector. And the only way the private sector can finance that is by debt, right? By loans, by issuing loans to people. So people are increasing by getting loans and mortgages or credit cards, right? So eventually what happens is there's so little money in the economy to run things that, you know, you go into a recession or a depression, right? And
Which,
then that's what happens.
yeah, so in our current economic climate, the stock market, casino aside, we are currently in a depression when it comes to small businesses, which we've discussed here before. Small businesses are 98% of all business and commerce in the United States. So when you are attacking or depressing the largest income economic generator in your country, your GDP is going to suffer. And so if you look at the text of PAYGO, it says right here, as a budget enforcement tool, the new statutory PAYGO process is aimed at preventing or at least discouraging net deficit increases arising from the enactment of direct spending and revenue legislation. It's a long way of saying, screw you, we're not going to invest in new areas unless we cut in other areas. So would you like pre-K for children so that they get a good head start? Great. Then we're going to cut Meals on Wheels for our seniors and screw those people. That's what this entire policy is about. And it really has no clear economic standing. If you were listening to what Andy was saying, and if you need to rewind it and go back, please do so. But if this is what their goal is, it is contraindicated for a downturn in the economy, which we are in now, right? But they got it anyway. So when we get back to the topic of progressive policies, and this is what I find so interesting, like if you look at our network here, and this is why I have such enthusiasm and pride for the work that we do, because even on our team here in this network, we come from a wide array of political backgrounds. We cover pretty much the entire political spectrum, but we're unified on progressive policy because it is fiscally responsible and socially sound, right? So if you consider yourself a traditional conservative and you're very worried about how we spend and that we're doing it in a responsible way, we got you covered. If you are interested in, maybe pro-life policies where people matter and, that you recognize that we are in this together, we got you covered. So this is where progressive policy is right in the center of the political spectrum. And so they have been saying that PAYGO is an impediment to that. So now let's take a look. Is that actually true? And this is where it gets a little confusing. So Andy, this is the last graphic.
What about the second one?
Oh, was that not up, PAYGO?
No, you didn't ask for it.
Oh, sorry. Skip it because it's
All
long.
right.
I'll just include these later as we're done.
Right.
It was just a wall of text anyway. So, Dave said he couldn't read it anyway.
Yeah,
so
just something else for people not to read. Yeah.
Right. It's just pretty. Okay. So on this last one, this is from the Congressional Budget Office. And if you're not familiar with what this organization does, they are bipartisan and fiercely bipartisan. So, and you never even heard Trump try to mess with them, talking about fake news or it's Democrat. No, they will cut a bitch. They are so fiercely bipartisan. And it's a bunch of economists who run through the numbers. So when something comes through, they've got to double check it. There's a congressional, I forget the name of it. I haven't had enough coffee, but there's a group that when a piece of legislation comes through, they've got to check it and make sure that it doesn't interfere with other pieces of legislation. So that's one side of it. These folks are just focused on the economics and economic policy. So PAYGO is one of these new regulations that they have to kind of keep in mind when a new piece of legislation comes through, but there's only one type of spending that PAYGO applies to. And this is something I didn't know, and so now I'm giving it to you. So PAYGO does not apply if I am a senator and I want to get money for my district where we happen to manufacture tanks like Iowa. And I want to make sure that I'm getting a couple $1 billion for a couple tanks. I can put through a piece of legislation or add an amendment to an existing bill to secure that funding. And if that bill becomes law, then the federal appropriations process kicks in, like Andy was talking about. They just sign it and credit the proper account with the money. So my district will get the billions of dollars. That is not affected by PAYGO in any way, shape, or form. So they can freely create the funds necessary to fund all of these port projects, all of them, all of them. The ones that do get affected by this arbitrary PAYGO rule are the ones that we fund every year. And this is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, what they call entitlements, right? So things that you rely on get affected by PAYGO right now. Things that they just want don't. So do you see how they've created this dual financing system out of thin air? And that's PAYGO. And so if you go back and look at the history of PAYGO, PAYGO was another one of those things that came from a far-right neocon think tank and was initially trotted out as kind of a joke, right? And then it was picked up and yeah, let's do it, let's do it. So from the very beginning, this has been something that has been presented inaccurately to the public and does not equally apply to all spending bills that come through Congress. Everybody got that? So we have just created, just like our dual justice system, we've created a dual financing system for no reason. So
there for no reason. There's a reason, right? It's to
no good
maintain the neoliberal mindset, right? That we can't afford it, so you can't have it, right?
But,
of course, you're going to finance the military-industrial complex for $760 billion every single year, and nobody's ever going to ask any questions about it, right? Like the whole thing is really just all you need to do is just look at how things unfold. Every time there's a change in the structure of government, right? I mean, you go from a Democratic president to a Republican president, right? It's been the same ever since Reagan, ever since, you get the GOP in there. Well, we're going to cut taxes on the rich because trickle down economics and that'll help everyone. And it doesn't. Well, it never does. And then they say, well, we spent too much money. We're going to have to cut back, right? They just cut the tax revenue from rich people, and they use that as an excuse to say, well, now we have to cut back on our spending, right? Mm-hmm. And they're the ones that came up with the phrasing of entitlements, which is your Social Security and your Medicaid and your Medicare and all those things that actually help people, right? And it's the same song and dance every time. And people think that Trump doing it was the first time that it's been done, and that makes him a horrible president. And it has nothing to do with that. It's from the exact same playbook since Reagan. It's always been.
Absolutely. So here's where we're going to get into maths. Maths is hard. So let's test this PAYGO thing, right? Let's test what they said and see if it actually plays out. So if we have a progressive policy like Green New Deal it's not subject to PAYGO at all. So if you write the bill and you fund it, I don't know, for 2-3 years, let's see how it goes, so that we can get jobs to places like West Virginia where they are been destitute for a very long time. Let's start there. Could you do it? Yes, you could. If that bill passes, then it goes through the standard federal appropriations process. It gets funded and we start churning it out, right? There's a new jobs program, federal jobs program. We talked about that on Wednesday with Dr. Kaboom. If you didn't see it, go watch it. We could fund that today through the standard process. All right, well, now let's look at Medicare for All, this particular policy, because Medicare for All is a little bit different, right? So we have Medicare and Social Security. Medicare for All could be argued that it does have to adhere to the PAYGO. So two things on this one. If Medicare for All needs to adhere to the pay-go plan, and we saw someone like AOC say, oh, no, we've got to repeal pay-go before we even try Medicare for All. Well, first off, you need to go back and read your own colleague's bill. Senator Jayapal, when she wrote this bill, working with Senator Sanders, it went through with a net zero. So it already adhered to pay-go. And what it did was you had the reduction of costs that we have now through our Medicare, Medicaid, and other social services that are very wasteful and costly. So it reduced those, and then it had a tax component for the 1% of the top incomes. So already Medicare for All, as written by Representative Jayapal, was at net zero. So the pay-go excuse did not apply to that at all. So either AOC hadn't read her colleague's bill or she was lying. I'm not sure which, and I'm not willing to call it out. You figure it out. But if we were going to do Medicare for All and not do the funding model that Representative Jayapal had already done all the work on, and let's say, we don't want to necessarily raise taxes too much on the 1%, maybe just tiny bit, maybe, then here's a way to do it. And this is where maybe you want to get out your calculator and check my numbers, because I went through and looked at them, and you tell me where I'm wrong. So right now, today, we are spending, okay, let's back up. The Mercatus study said that Medicare for All would cost $40 trillion over 10 years. So we're going to make the assumption that they're right, because they pretty well were. But let's just use that as a starting point. And it's actually a high number. Other studies that came out said maybe it was going to be 34 trillion, but let's stick with 40. So for 1 year, that's 4 trillion. 4 trillion. That's the cost for 1 year of Medicare for All. That is expanded benefits. We do away with the prescription donut hole that is literally killing our seniors. We do away with bankruptcy from not being able to afford medical bills. And we actually invest in our people during a global pandemic, because that is the morally right thing to do. And oh, by the way, we're going to save some money, and I'll show you how. So now we have our moral compass straight, our fiscal compass straight, and we will not raise the deficit at all. Here's how we do it. Pretty simple. So if we're trying to get to 4 trillion in spending for 1 year and offset that with pay-go, first, let's look at the ACA or Obamacare. We currently today spend $1.7 trillion on ACA. And we now know that ACA made its cost savings by reducing payments on doctors and hospitals. That reduced the number of independent practitioners and created hospital groups, which have raised fees exponentially on us, the consumers. So we're paying the cost twice on that. We're paying it through the ACA program itself, and then us as individual consumers, which is not part of the 1.7 trillion. So let's take that 1.7 trillion and all the subsidies that we're giving to the insurance companies who don't add anything to your care. Zero. They provide no benefit whatsoever between you and your doctor. Zero. So that's 1.7. We've got that. So Medicare and Medicaid itself, that is a separate program from the ACA, and that's another $1.4 trillion a year. So what are we up to now? We're at 1.7,
3.1.
Oh, we're almost there. Holy shit. We're almost
Holy
there.
shit.
We're almost
Good
there.
Lord.
Right. So here's where it gets a little tricky, and this might be a little bit of a hard sell. So part of Medicaid is for veterans under the VA system. And most people don't know that when they say, let's cut back on the funding for Medicaid because it's just a bunch of poor people, screw those people. You're talking about our veterans too, because the VA funds vouchers under Medicaid for all of our veterans who are either too far from a VA facility, like remote areas, remote being 2 hours away, which is most veterans, or they need specialized care, and it allows them to go see any doctor that they want to, right? So that's all under the Medicaid plan. So if we're going to do away with the existing Medicare and Medicaid program, now we got to start looking at VA and TRICARE, which it makes sense. If we're going to improve coverage and reduce costs for 75%, 80% of the population, why wouldn't you do it for the other 20% and allow that veteran to still go see any doctor or specialist that they want? Makes sense. Let's do that. So in TRICARE alone, you're anywhere from, now if you're just looking at VA facilities, $589 billion a year, but if you do the entire TRICARE program, that's 1.8 trillion per year. So add in the 1.8 trillion. Where are we at, Andy, with our number? What do you have?
We are at what were we at 3.1, and then you're going to add
1.8.
1.8. So you're at 4.9.
Well, damn it. Now we've spent too much, right? We've offset too much. So we have 0.8 in there, and we have not raised a dime in taxes to do any of this. Nothing. We haven't even asked for Americans across the country to have that shared responsibility payment that was in Representative Jayapal's bill. There's no tax increase for anybody going through this model that I just went through. Nobody pays a dime more. If we offset the way the PAYGO requires, ACA, Medicare, Medicaid, and TRICARE, we're done. But let's say you don't want to mess with TRICARE. Then the Trump tax cuts, that was like 3 or 4 trillion per year. And now not only have we paid for Medicare for all, but now we've added another 2 trillion that we can use to reduce the deficit just to make somebody happy.
Yes, let's remind people that the reason that we're going through these numbers is not because this is actually the reality of the way that things get paid for. It's just that if the Democrats want to enforce the pay-go rule, this is why it doesn't apply, right? Mm-hmm. Although that's not necessary, right? It's just, horse caca like we've talked about. But even if they say how you're going to pay for it, well, it's still going to cost less money than the system that is currently in place, right? And there's another thing that people don't realize. And when you talk about Medicare for all, you're basically talking about dismantling the insurance, the health insurance system, right? Because it's no longer necessary. You don't need the middleman anymore, right? Because the government is going to be funding this program, right? Directly, paying the doctors and the hospitals, and the people just go in and they get their health care and they don't pay a dime. Right? Mm-hmm. But what happens is all of those people that are employed in the health insurance industry, are no longer going to have jobs in those industries, right? Which means that there's going to be a lot of people that are unemployed, which means that with the installation of Medicare for all, we also have to ensure that the people that are going to be displaced from their work because of that need a just transition into another field, another place that they can work, which is why the job guarantee that we talked about on Wednesday is such an important policy that needs to go hand in hand with the Medicare for all system, right?
See through the smoke, cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't, is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that ass.